I'm Benji Strauss. I'm the CEO of a young company called CardiMetrix, and we've developed a system called the Edema Sock. And before I get into it, exactly what it is that we do, I'll tell you a little bit about how we got started. Towards the end of engineering school, I formed a team of other engineers and cardiologists to work on the issue of heart failure readmissions, which is one of the most expensive public health burdens right now in the U.S., costing $34 billion a year. Subsequently got some funding to manufacture a number of systems, and we put together and built a number of fairly advanced and complex systems and got a team of investigators at some outstanding institutions throughout the country, including our own Mount Sinai, to partner with us for studies. And in the process of manufacturing some of these devices, we also came across the opportunity to manufacture some elegant but also much simpler systems. And so I'll get into that right now. So what's the problem that we're dealing with? The answer is that monitoring for peripheral edema, which is swelling in the feet, can be one of the most effective ways to determine fluid retention status and medication efficacy in heart failure patients. However, the way that we monitor for this, both in the hospital as well as in the home, are both inaccurate and insufficient. And what that leads to is either hospital discharges that are too early, or it could lead to poor home management of heart failure. And what those both ultimately lead to are expensive hospital readmissions for heart failure, each one costing an average of $17,000. And so what we've designed is a solution that is extremely accurate and non-variable. We call this the Edema Sock. So this device is placed on the foot just like a sock, but it can measure ankle and foot circumferences, and from that estimate volume of the foot. And in doing so, this can give a highly reliable and objective reading of edema severity on a daily basis. And by determining edema severity, we can then determine the appropriate dose of diuretics that the patient could be taking. The idea being that if we can determine these changes early on accurately in such a fashion, we can adjust diuretic doses in the home, as opposed to once the patients are so sick that they need, say, IV diuresis in the emergency room or say, an ICU visit. So how does this work? Using a novel proprietary method, this device can measure daily changes in the foot volume and thus determine the extent of peripheral edema. It has an embedded Bluetooth modem to transmit the results to a smartphone, which can then relay that data to a cloud. The patient's care provider can periodically, say once or twice a week, analyze the trends. Say, is this patient's leg volume getting lower? Is it increasing? And from that, determine if the patient's health is deteriorating or if perhaps we need to titrate those medications. As far as competition, there are a number of different types of systems that are used to monitor, say, heart failure status or for edema. So on the left, we have Honeywell's HomeMed monitor, which will take a number of, say, off-the-shelf components and have patients use these on a regular basis. So, say, blood pressure, which is also a reliable indicator of fluid status in patients, and a weight scale, which is another somewhat reliable measure, can be used and transmitted remotely. The problem is that those are fairly cumbersome to use, and so that leads to poor patient compliance. And so when patients don't comply, there is no data, and that doesn't really help. And there are also systems like, say, the baseline volume meter, which works by water displacement, which can, in theory, get reliable metrics. However, in practice, it's a little bit different. And perhaps most importantly, was found that in patients who didn't have carpeted bathrooms, when they used this and water spilled on the floor, there were a lot of fall victims because the floor was slippery, and you had heart failure patients who then went back to the hospital, not for a heart failure readmission, but for a broken hip. So that didn't work out well either. And so we think that this provides another reliable, nice, accurate way to measure volume without, say, the inaccuracies or the dangers associated with the other systems. So how do we commercialize this, and how do we get reimbursed for it? The cycle over time is that as our device prevents hospital readmissions, adoption of our technology by hospitals should become more and more common. So the way we see this working is that as soon as a patient is admitted to the hospital with heart failure, they're given one of these socks, and this is used on a daily or bi-daily basis to measure their fluid volume. And this is something that they can take home with them when they're discharged from the hospital. And because they've used it in the hospital, they're also trained there in its use. And so they can bring this home with them and use it every day, say for the first 2, 3, 4 months after the discharge. And we'd also like to send a new sock every, say, 6 weeks. And we'd like to sell the socks for $30 and charge another nominal fee for the transmission and analysis and hosting service. And the idea is that as these socks can reduce more and more readmissions, they will be, hospitals will be further incentivized to continue prescribing them for patients to further reduce their hospital readmissions and the CMS penalties that are becoming an increasing problem for hospitals. And again, that would kind of create a cascade for us in prescribing more and more of these. As far as the market and opportunity, again, there are 1 million readmissions every year. 500,000 patients are monitored on other different types of systems. Much lower percentage of those patients actually comply with them. As far as a strategy for saying ultimately getting an insurance code or reimbursement, 4.5 million or 3 out of every 4 heart failure patients is a Medicare patient, and so that would be the first target for a reimbursement code. And we'd like to target those 450,000 patients who are currently on other systems to provide a better alternative for monitoring and preventing hospital readmissions. As far as progress, we do have functioning prototype. We've submitted we've submitted provisional, converted to utility patents, and filed the PCT. We were awarded a micro grant from the American Heart Association for being one of the top 3 innovative cardiac device startups of 2015. And our next step is to perfect our prototypes, do some more validation studies. As far as regulatory, this is a pretty textbook class 1 play. So what we would do is file 510K exemption, which would be a nice way to get to market pretty quickly. Once we've done that, we'd like to do a small pilot study just to validate accuracy, execute manufacturing distribution partnerships, 2 of which are in the works right now. Ultimately, after that, pilot commercialization, and then build to a larger study to demonstrate not just that our device is accurate and that it does what we say it does, but that this can actually improve outcomes and reduce costs for payers. And that's what would ultimately enable us to get a unique reimbursement code for that. So, thank you.
I have a question on IP.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have a or have you had a legal opinion completed by one of the IP legal lawyers, to kind of map the landscape and make us comfortable that this is truly novel, there's no prior art and so on?
Yes.
Yes. You have that.
Yeah, our counsel is Barnes & Thornburg out of Chicago. They do all of our patent work. They wrote a patentability opinion. They did a prior art search, and they filed all the claims for us.
Okay, thank you.
How'd you come up with a $350,000 number?
As far as what we need to raise,
Yeah.
that would be for hiring a full-time engineer to continue working on it. That would be for running a pilot study at a hospital, which has obviously high overhead, and developing 2nd and 3rd generation prototypes until we really get comfortable with something that we like.
Do you have
and
a
also
budget
experience for burn.
That sounds like a very small amount of money to do all those different projects. Do you have a budget?
I mean, the cost of this prototype, the first prototype, we did this all on our own, not with a contract engineering group, cost us under $300. As far as parts used to prototype it, consisted of an ankle brace that we bought off the shelf from like a Walgreens, consisted of some strain gauges that we embedded in the system, coin cell battery, microcontroller, battery, Bluetooth transmitter, and smartphone, and an app that we developed ourselves. As far as the software is pretty simple. We're pretty comfortable with that. So as far as development, that's really all taken care of, and we have the electronics all set. So we're comfortable with the number.
Another question more on the marketing side. How many of the patients with edema also have diabetes? or some of these cardio.
How many patients with heart failure and edema also have
Right,
diabetes?
yeah.
I don't know. I'm not a.
Because there are quite a few also digital apps and disease management software out there looking at diabetic population, which is huge. And I was wondering whether you looked at potential bundling and synergies at putting together these. Okay.
Yeah, we haven't looked at diabetes. Okay. My focus is, at least for now, is on heart failure, and we'll see how we grow.
So one question is, my understanding is, so for example, with CHF, just getting the patient to weigh themselves on a daily basis is sufficient to get the information that you might need for a clinical intervention. So it's a twofold question. One is, what have you learned from the other startups and other companies that have tried to do something in terms of home monitoring like that, and why do you think the sock is going to solve those problems specifically? Well, actually, maybe start there.
So, I'm not totally comfortable with the assertion that measuring a patient's weight is sufficient for a clinical intervention, because of the 2 million patients who are hospitalized every year, half of them end up back in the hospital, which would indicate that weight alone, which is by far the most common method of monitoring, right, it would suggest that that's not really sufficient. And I guess the reason why is that the idea behind weight is that, weight correlates with fluid retention, but at the end of the day, patients can get really sick without gaining fluid, gaining 3 pounds. And at the other end, there are also other reasons that patients can gain a lot of weight, right? If they eat a ton of food and they haven't exercised and they're constipated or whatever, right? They can also gain weight pretty quickly. So at the end of the day, I think the big problem is that.
Is it clear among those 2 million what percentage had some weight gain that they measured or they didn't measure?
No, it's not. It's not really clear. It's kind of all bundled into one. That's a good question, though. So as far as other startups, there are companies like CardioMems that tried to say, instead of looking at weight as a correlate for fluid retention, they would look at pulmonary arterial pressure for fluid retention. And the truth of the matter is that does a great job. The problem is with systems like that is that they're implantable. So you have OR time, you have the implant cost, the cost of the hardware itself, I think, hovers around $35,000. And so it's cheaper for hospitals to have their patients readmitted twice as opposed to implanting one of those. And at the end of the day, you still have the compliance issue with that implantable system, because patients still have to lean on a pillow to transmit the data. I think the biggest lesson that we learned is still one of compliance. And so, right, we're talking about getting patients to stand on a scale. Even with a scale, not all patients comply with that. And so you could make the argument that patients might not put on the sock. That would be a very fair critique. What I would say, though, is that I think half the problem is monitoring patients in the hospital, in which compliance is not an issue, because there are patient care associates and nurses who can do the monitoring, put the sock on for the patient. And as far as home monitoring, what we're seeing a little bit more of now are home care aids coming to help patients. And so if they can assist the patients with putting on the device, that goes a long way. There still is a cohort of patients that are alone. But the patients who are alone are generally also the ones who are a little bit healthier. So say class 1 and class 2 heart failure, as opposed to class 3 and class 4 heart failure patients who might not be able to stand on a scale or put on a sock. And so what we're really going for are the patients who have somebody to help them don and doff the sock, say, on a daily basis.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Have you done some research into how muscle mass and body fat could affect the readout? Is there much variability looking at different body types?
So I haven't looked into that directly, but as far as I understand, people don't gain that much muscle or that much fat that quickly. Right?
Yeah, I'm not really day to day, but like
Okay.
between patients. So
between patients. Okay.
might some people not be able to use this because they don't fit the ideal body type?
I don't know. I don't know if there is an ideal body type for this. If you have heart failure patients, they probably have, a less ideal body type, and specifically really big legs that are waterlogged. So no, I don't know.
Okay.
about muscle mass and fat.
Thanks.